Welcome to the beat, everyone. I'm Ari Melber, and we start with what can only be described, I should say, as a self-enrichment scheme. Normally, presidents are busy presidenting, and they're not trying to get a lot of money for themselves during their time in office. But President Trump is going down the road of this crypto self-enrichment, with many experts saying it is an open door for corruption. Now, I want to show you a trifecta. JD Vance, along with Trump's adult sons, family members, going to a major crypto conference in Las Vegas. So this is their priority, whether that is policy, business self-enrichment, or a conflict mix of the two, is one of the big questions tonight. Now, experts, lawmakers, Trump himself have warned that while crypto may serve some purposes for some people, it is a high-risk gamble, definitely a way that you could lose money. So if you don't have a lot of money to lose, be careful. All of those kind of warnings we heard before Donald Trump found these donors, what some call the Trump Crypto Alliance. That's a mouthful there, but I'm quoting the Wall Street Journal headline. This week, his family's media company, right, which said they wanted to do Truth Social and that stuff, now has found with the power of the presidency, they're changing gears. They want to bring in over $2 billion in Bitcoin while Trump oversees a government that's supposed to regulate it. So that's where the self-enrichment comes from. Regulating, profiting, and then cheerleading what everyone understands to be a new and potentially costly, dangerous techno situation. Here was JD Vance.
I'm here today to say loud and clear, with President Trump, crypto finally has a champion and an ally in the White House. Maybe the most important thing that we did for this community, we reject regulators, but it's been quite a while since I've been to a conference with this level of energy. But I promise I'm not just saying that to juice my own meme coins.
That's classic JD Vance, a sentence offered straight up, but supposed to be a joke. But here the point isn't any comedy review. The punchline of that joke that he's not profiting off meme coins actually, and maybe he didn't think it all the way through, would seem to inadvertently criticize his boss, Donald Trump, their family, and Elon Musk, the sometimes White House advisor. Now, the Trump administration is already kneecapping the efforts to enforce blatant fraud and crime in crypto, and they've disbarred the criminal DOJ unit that deals with that. They want to change regulations surrounding crypto to bring it further into mainstream finance. And the Journal is reporting on that as a policy issue. And if there wasn't so much self-enrichment going on, you could just have that debate. Is this good or bad? Is this a bubble? Is it risky? But when you have billions of Bitcoin coming into Trump's company and many, many donors giving meme coin donations to Trump, we have a bigger problem here. One leading crypto company says it will be a sponsor of the committee organizing Trump's military parade this summer. Another way that they're funneling the money in. Call that supersizing the swamp if you want. Then there was that dinner last week, which was separate from Bitcoin, which I just mentioned, one of the major cryptocurrencies. This was the dinner where Trump isn't just buying other people's crypto and maybe benefiting off what he knows could happen in the regulations he controls. This was directly foreign money coming into the Trump coin. Here were Trump's sons today.
Hey guys, we're bringing Bitcoin to America, and America is going to win the crypto revolution. And we have a president who loves this industry and is behind this industry 100%. Hey guys, I'm telling you, we as a family could not be more excited about this.
It's amazing. I know my father made a lot of promises to the crypto community. You understand you're really on the precipice of something special, and that includes all those who've been in this from our standpoint in the private sector. I mean, between Eric, myself, I think we can show our true level of commitment.
There's a level of commitment to making money. There's not a long-term sort of crypto plan here. The sons clearly got engaged, got their father warmer to it. But is it government graft? Would you be having this level of interest if they weren't double dipping with the control over crypto regulations? Someone else who's big in this space, who of course has his own money to begin with, is Elon Musk. This I've showed you from the very beginning of the administration. And while I would admit, personal opinion, it's kind of cute. Who doesn't love a cartoon dog in a suit? This is one of the joke meme mascots for the very real money that Musk has been able to use, combining his influence and power into this so-called Dogecoin. If the word Doge is familiar, remember, long before Trump was calling his government efforts that, he was promoting the word Doge to make his own money off of this coin. The value then soared when Trump announced Musk would join the administration and that they would have a Dogecoin department called Doge. This is not normal, and it is an example of the blatant way that they're using promotion and government power to enrich themselves. Now, that brings us back to government efforts by Elon Musk. You follow the news, you might have noticed we've heard a lot less from him lately. Major backlash, including in red states, to what Musk was actually doing as people learned about it. And he is saying, this is interesting, he's got the memo that he's heard some of the feedback. Indeed, he's now playing the victim, saying his group became the whipping boy for everything. Something bad would happen anywhere. We would get blamed for it, even if we had nothing to do with it. Now, put aside whether he sounds like someone who doesn't like being criticized, put aside whether you think that's a fair assessment, and just note that Elon Musk is aware that what he was doing is unpopular. That's step one in a democracy. And if it's unpopular enough and it's major change and he didn't ever win an election in the first place, it's a reminder that while the pushback may have taken some time, it appears to have worked. He got the message. He's been demoted. You're not seeing him at the cabinet meetings this week. What comes next, we don't know. But interestingly, he's also still using his perch, where he's asked more about political questions, say, than the average CEO, to take a shot at the GOP budget that Trump is backing.
So, I was like disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, not just decrease it, and undermines the work that the Doge team is doing. I think a bill can be big or it can be beautiful, but I don't know if it can be both. My personal opinion.
Simple way to put it, but it's kind of a fair point. He's referencing the way Trump talks, but when you say big, it's costly. And it's costly in a way that is hypocritical to what Republicans claimed. Keep in mind, all that talk about a balanced budget or interest payments trumps $4 trillion deficit bomb. That's $4 trillion deficit dollars. Hard to even get your mind around what that means, $4 trillion. But I want to quote one way you can compare it. This is from a budget expert who worked in the Obama White House. In the current fiscal year, government would spend more on interest payments for what is now this growing deficit than on defense. That's all of our military spending. Or than on Medicaid or Medicare. And so if you are to believe that Republicans care about balancing the budget in Wall Street and spending, Musk said a lot about spending too much. If you believe that, then you'd have to believe that they're against their own bill. And for all the criticisms of Elon Musk, we will note, because we're the news and we tell you what's true, his reference to it being a big deficit buster is true. And his reference to it being not beautiful if it's big is at least consistent. And now other Republicans are hearing about all this as the word gets out. There's a lot going on. It takes time to get the word out. But some constituents are mad.
This provision was unknown to me when I voted for the bill.
You promised that you would not vote for a bill that cuts Social Security and Medicare.
Most of the cuts in the bill really addressed Medicaid. When we say you have to work in order to earn the Medicaid, we don't have that problem in Nebraska.
I was also proud to vote for President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill last week. This is a generational investment.
That's how it's playing this week, last night. The Post reports that Republicans didn't want to make life harder for any millionaires. They gave more tax breaks to multimillionaires and billionaires, while everyone else is going to have to pay for it. And then you have those deficit payments I mentioned. They're also cutting Medicaid and food assistance and Medicare. 10 million Americans could go off insurance under the way the bill is operating. That has raised alarms from the start. And I want to remind you that Democrats did refer to this problem on the Republican budgeting during the campaign.
This guy wants to throw tens of millions of people off of the health insurance that they have.
Throwing tens of millions of Americans off of health care. and cutting Social Security and Medicare.
He is going to make sure that taxes are cut for the millionaires, the billionaires, and the giant corporations.
He wants the middle class to pay the price for another huge tax cut that would mostly help him and his rich friends.
That may have been campaign season talk, but each one of those claims we selected from what you can recognize are prominent Democrats because they are true. The Democrats weren't right about everything during the campaign, and there were some other kind of side issues and clashes where they clearly lost ground with the voters. We can measure that. But maybe there also wasn't enough attention in the way that our political system works on the big stuff, on the way the money was going to be routed up the line to the super rich, to the crypto speculators, and away from people who just need health care to get by. Here's Nobel-winning economist Paul Krugman, who says this bill is the worst piece of legislation in modern history. Millions of Americans about to see crucial support snatched away. Significant number, he argues, and he works off evidence. So I read this to you tonight with all seriousness. Based on the way this works, people will, quote, die prematurely due to lack of adequate medical care or nutrition under the bill that is barreling towards us. The economist, Professor Krugman, joins us when we're back in 90 seconds. We're back with Nobel Prize winning economist Paul Krugman, author of the Paul Krugman Substack newsletter, longtime author and writer. Welcome. I laid out just some of the strands here. What do you see both in the budget and in a fairly blatant amount of self-dealing and alleged corruption?
Wow. The budget, it is everything people have been saying. I think what you really need to understand is that the whole alleged premise that there are people who aren't working, who should be working, who are getting government aid is essentially fraud. It doesn't happen. If you look at how many people are actually getting Medicaid who are working age, not disabled, and could at least on paper be working, it's like less than 3% of the total number of people receiving Medicaid, and most of them probably have extenuating circumstances that just don't show in the numbers. They're caring for an aged relative or something like that. So the idea that there are people living it up on Medicaid while not working is just fake. And all that they're doing is trying to avoid openly cutting Medicaid. What they're trying to do is create impossible barriers to actually applying. They're just trying to create paperwork, impose impossible paperwork, administrative requirements on the people in America who are least able to, deal with that. So it's cruel, it's arbitrary, and all of that is to pay for a small fraction of the tax cuts for the rich. And it's only a small fraction. Because of that, we're getting a massive increase in the budget deficit. So this is a really ugly and irresponsible piece of legislation. Like I said, it's the worst, possibly the worst budget in American history.
What did you think of Elon Musk's point that it is big, and if it's too big, then he doesn't like it?
Well, the funny thing is, this is not a bill with a lot of spending. His complaint, he's complaining that it's spending too much, but it isn't. It's all tax cuts that are driving the deficit increase. And also, when he talked about what he and Doge have been trying to accomplish, Doge is another fraud. It's very unlikely that Musk, in the end, saved a single penny. He's probably created more costs through the chaos he's created than any actual savings. Doge's accounting statements, anybody else. I had an employee whose reports looked like what's been coming out of Elon Musk's people, I'd fire him on the spot.
Well, it's funny you say that, because there's an argument that the way he did it, while he is known for pushing and he's taken over companies and certainly changed the workforce and fired people, I'm not minimizing that, but the way he did this and both the speed of the entry and the exit was actually to a far lower standard than most of his companies. In other words, he's never in any of his companies that he's been involved in had someone come in, try to do a bunch in 110 days and have him leave and say that satisfies a 5 or 10 year plan. I mean, it's no way to run anything, is it?
No, it's not a way to run a company for sure. And this is the U.S. government. The U.S. government is not a profit-making enterprise. The U.S. government is there to serve us, the people. And you parachute a bunch of like 19-year-olds into agencies they don't understand, have them start cutting stuff, firing people whose jobs they don't understand, then discovering, oops, I've just taken away the security that keeps our nuclear weapons safe. And this is it was crazy, complete madness and arrogant stupidity to imagine that he could actually save money that way.
As you know, there's a lot of noise in life and politics and internet, television. Hey, maybe we all contribute to it in our own ways. But the what you used the word fraud, what I'll call the noisiness and unreliability of the Trump administration, of what the president says, the tone he sets, and people on down, it seems to now be sort of, I guess, something everyone just has to deal with and price in, unless and until, right, there's a change in the democracy. I want to play like a Trump. Here's a Kevin Hassett who works with Trump. The way they're talking about maybe they'll start tariffing individual companies. I mean, maybe they'll start tariffing just Apple because he's mad at Apple. He's gone zigzagging on trade, as you know. And so I want to ask you on the other side of this quote, what we should reasonably do, both as a democracy and as a market economy, one of your specialties, when there's this much misinformation and unreliability from the top of the U.S. government. Take a listen.
It'd be a $3,000 iPhone if they tried to make everything here.
$3,500.
$3,500 for a good one, the kind you'd like, probably. Hassett. But
No,
what's the
I'm
offer?
a smoke signal kind of guy.
What's the supply? Yeah, what's the supply chain issue? I mean, what is Tim Cook supposed to do?
Right. Well, we'll see how it works out.
Professor.
Wow. Yeah. Business people complain about uncertainty. They used to complain about uncertainty under, Barack Obama, who was actually a very stable president and didn't change policy. If you ask a question, suppose I'm making some business plans that involve Europe. So first, we had the president announce a 50% tariff on everything from the European Union on Friday, then announce on Sunday, well, it's been paused till July 9th. So you tell me, what will tariff rates on stuff from Europe be on July 15th? And how am I supposed to, as a business person, make plans, make investments when I have no idea what's going to happen? I don't even know that there's going to be I don't even know that the tariff is going to be the same for all companies. It's massively illegal and unconstitutional to single out particular companies for tax retribution, which means it's probably going to happen given the kind of administration we have. So this is the most anti-business environment. I mean, of all things, but this is a tremendously anti-business, anti-economic growth environment that I've seen in my lifetime.
Wow. And that's saying something. And of course, it goes to, he has these maximalist claims and branding and PR, and then that's how it's actually going down. Paul Krugman, thanks for joining us tonight. People can Google Paul Krugman Substack for your newsletter and your writing, some of which we quoted. I want to tell folks what's coming up. Harvard University is winning. The law firms that chose to fight are winning. There's actually a blueprint here for the post-hype phase of Trump's crackdown, and we have a very special guest on that. But first, Wall Street has a new insult for Donald Trump, and he doesn't like it. President Trump's second term has been rockier than his first. We are now about 128 days in, and there have been more legally extreme measures out of the White House than blocked in court, more than the first term at this point. Right here, more market volatility, specifically driven by Trump's tariffs than any other government move driving this kind of volatility in decades. And that up and down, that volatility reflects two problems for Trump. First, widespread rejection of his trade war. And that's been a problem for weeks, which is part of why he's backed off. But second is the growing awareness of the reality that while Trump opens with the strongman approach and vows a tough stand, he then often later backs down under pressure. It's something that China found by standing up to President Trump and hitting back on the tariffs. And that reality undercuts Trump's claimed business persona, the tough negotiator who will always get results. Now, we know some people believe in that. Politically, that's fine, but we're past campaign season. Trump is president, and he's been opening with these giant bids. Some call it maximalism, if you want to get fancy. But people are learning his patterns, where he'll issue a huge demand, create a crisis, but increasingly often he will end up backing down, the Times reports. Quick example we all lived through. Trump hit China with big tariffs. He warned them, quote, "Do not retaliate," as if he could control the response of a foreign nation, which has its own economy, its own issues, its own military, just by tapping that out in all caps from the White House account. It didn't work. As you probably know, China did retaliate. They matched the tariffs. It drove a clash that went up and up, at one point hitting 145% tariffs, which is literally more than double the cost of every item from that country, and everyone knew that wasn't sustainable. In other words, we weren't going to have years with everything costing double. The real impacts began. The U.S. ports began to empty out. Companies started warning the higher prices were coming from Trump tariffs, and then the empty shelves were going to come. And as the weeks went by, before that hit an actual crisis level, Trump backed off most of the key tariffs, and he did it by himself. He blinked because China did not offer real concessions. There was no trade deal, no handshake, no big announcement where both leaders get to say everyone's winning something. No, he just backed down. And business leaders have been facing this in real time. And I always try to level with you. If you're busy living your life, you may not have understandably followed every back and forth trade threat. You might have said, we'll see how high prices get at the Walmart or the bodega, and until then, be busy with life. But the people who trade this stuff and trade stocks, they've been dealing with it daily. And the Times reports, many of those on Wall Street say Trump has clearly been chickening out. They've even coined a phrase, a shorthand, Trump always chickens out, which spells out to the acronym TACO. And this is like real news. This is really something they're saying. And that's coming from Wall Street, which leans right and is a place where negotiating is a big deal. It's a type of skill. They take it seriously. Now, today we saw the president bristles at the TACO term. He said that question, even asking about it, was, quote, nasty. That coming from a politician known for his very tough nicknames and attacks on all kinds of other people, but I guess the word chicken is too much for him today. Now, that's just in the trade war. The battles are measurable there, and the news comes fast. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is how these lessons could apply more broadly, which, it's no exaggeration to say, could affect our free speech and democracy in this country if people learn the right lessons. As Trump's approach backfires and clashes with people and groups who have at least the power and money to fight back, and who choose to fight back, who use their power, because we can now document over these 120 plus days who is winning. And so Trump has convinced many supporters that he's the boss he played in his fictional television show, which we all remember. It was on our sister channel, NBC, back when he was just doing reality TV. But what's interesting right now is how he is trying to sort of enact that version of reality in the White House, and it is faltering. Posturing a performance, a presidential version of the boss he played in The Apprentice, is how Jonathan Chait writes in The Atlantic. Quote, sitting in a plush leather chair, doling out justice to quavering supplicants. But the evidence suggests a clear pattern, although Trump instructs targets to submit. Doing so merely sets them up for more humiliation and abuse. So Trump demanded China surrender, just as he wanted universities and law firms to surrender to those executive orders, which were unfair and probably illegal, although the day they came down, there wasn't a court ruling on that yet by definition. But I can remind you, the federal government's usually restricted from using its powers to, say, punish dissent and First Amendment protected free speech. And Trump made it more likely he would lose in court because he admitted those were the motivations. He didn't, for example, say, we just are trying to make sure that we regulate law firms. He said, I'm going after firms named X, Y, and Z, Wilmer Hale, because they represented people I don't like. Harvard has power, prestige, and more money than most corporations. They've been winning. They have a $50 billion endowment, so they've been fighting back. They got a federal judge to shut down one of the retaliation plots that would try to ban any new students from abroad from going to Harvard, which seems pretty unfair and now is not happening as long as a judge keeps that frozen. Law firms who fought Trump executive orders have won 3 times just this month already. So that's the power of pushback. But that's not all. You can say, okay, Ari, that's some examples, right? That's examples on one side. Now let's just briefly contrast it to the law firms and the universities that just gave in. Maybe they were trying to avoid Trump's ire. But here's the deal. In the second term, different than the first, he is more blunt and direct. He is unshackled. And he sees their surrender as weakness that invites more abuse. Trump now openly plotting to push those surrender law firms to do even more free work for him and his agenda, even though they already gave in. Columbia is one of the universities that basically gave in earlier, and it's found Trump is not even letting up for a few weeks. New York Times headline there showing this government, with so many things to deal with, is back at Columbia arguing the school is discriminating against Jewish students as it goes after them on Trump's continuing retribution tour. Now, let's be clear. The administration is citing an area, an issue where Trump is referring to a real world problem. Anti-Semitism is a very ancient hatred that endures. It's a problem in America. It's a problem in many countries. But weaponizing it for partisan politics in a way that has left many experts and Jewish leaders, by the way, opposed to Trump's effort to hijack the concern. That's one of the problems with leaning on a real problem to try to settle scores, because it appears to clearly be, according to the evidence, part of the ongoing retribution crackdowns. Whether that's law firms that represented his opponents, like I mentioned, or students who simply oppose MAGA and Trump agenda items who happen to go to Columbia.
Columbia University yields to President Trump in a battle over federal funding.
Columbia University will give in to demands from the Trump administration in order to restore hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding.
The university agreed to put its Middle East Studies Department under new supervision. They will ban face coverings and make changes to the disciplinary process. But critics blasted the move.
If we, the faculty, the teachers, do not stand up for these values, who can we be for our students?
Fair question. And if you gave in to Trump to try to get hundreds of millions of dollars back that he probably legally wouldn't have won out in his effort to deny you, but if you do that, what's the cost? If we're talking about cost, well, Columbia's finding that it didn't get him off campus for even a few weeks. He wants to have government control the curriculum, which is not conservative, by the way. He wants to affect how people are dressing. And then he's back on the chosen issue of the Middle East, and people can then analyze whether that seems like a consistent, real thing or an effort to, again, weaponize more complicated issues. So part of it's about abuse, an administration so extreme that it targets free speech so much that it's already run into walls in court. But the other part here is about something that I bet you know about because you are watching MSNBC, whether you're doing that on live TV or YouTube or however you're hearing my voice. I bet you have an interest in political strategy, which is still how part of the world works. And in politics, you have seasoned veterans that may have some lessons for the novices here. And no disrespect, but we've seen some novices, some rookies give in to Trump, hoping that they could just duck the MAGA politics of America right now, only to find out that's impossible if he wants to come get you. Because some of these MAGA crackdowns are coming for you either way. And surrendering will not make them go away. In the same piece I mentioned, Mr. Chait writes that winning with Trump is impossible because the relationship itself is lose-lose. Attempts to turn a productive connection into an exploitive one create these losses for both sides. That's probably the difference between compromise, which people have to do all the time at work or in life with sometimes disagreeable people or situations. The difference between that and countering an extreme threat for the extreme threat that it is. A former FBI chief who prosecuted the mafia, so he knows that turf, has now compared surrendering to Trump's second-term tactics to surrendering to mob tactics. Veteran FBI Director James Comey, who is now facing yet another Trump-sparked probe, which looks like retaliation, we'll let the courts decide, broke down exactly that comparison here on MSNBC.
They must have never seen a mob movie, because you give the mob a piece of your bar, first thing they do is bring their friends in to drink for free, then they burn it down for the insurance. They will be sorry they made a deal with this administration.
They will be sorry, says a public servant who, whatever you think of his choices, has been found across multiple investigations to be an honest public servant. And he's looked down both roads, even when he had a duty to work for Trump best he could, because he had a 10-year FBI term. He's looked down both roads, and for the groups with the power and the money, the better road, even by self-interest alone, is holding your ground and fighting, says Mr. Comey. And the record shows, so far, that has been more successful. I'll leave this up for a moment. Some of these are logos you may or may not know, but Harvard you know, and the other law firms are the ones who said, we'll fight. So far, they're winning. And others capitulated, from tech bros worried about jail time who are still being hassled, to some of those other entities and bankers and groups. Now, I also want to add one more point. This idea of whether you pay lawyers and fight and go for it is not relevant for everyone. There are people who are isolated, people without money to hire a lawyer, let alone a team of lawyers. They're just more in survival mode. But for those big organizations, the big businesses, the rich elites, the law firms I mentioned, for them, the evidence suggests in these first 120 days, fighting back is not just a way to be true to yourselves, the career you've chosen. It also looks like the more victorious strategy. As for the writer I quoted, to which we are indebted for some of the points in this piece, Jonathan Chait joins us next. We're back with The Atlantic's Jonathan Chait, looking at the difference between trying to duck the moment we're in or perhaps face it. You wrote this piece. Share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, I thought the China negotiation really highlighted what had been a trend throughout the whole administration, as you showed in the last segment. They had this really blunt warning to everyone who was facing down Trump's tariff threats, right? Do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. And then no, everyone listened except China. China retaliated, and then they were, sort of warning, oh, you've done it now. Oh, you're going to get it bad. Oh, you're going to be sorry. And then they, announced this big deal with China. They're happy they're smiling with China. China, does not seem to have regretted retaliating at all. The whole idea that China would regret having gone toe-to-toe with Trump was just forgotten. It was just memory hold completely. So I think if you look back at a lot of the examples, Harvard and Columbia is a great one. Look, Harvard has its troubles with Trump, but who would you rather be right now, Harvard or Columbia? Columbia has just lost its dignity altogether. As you said, the law firms that capitulated to Trump, they're just getting extorted again and again, and the law firms that fought him have won. I think just today we've seen yet another example of this, which is Gretchen Whitmer. Whitmer decided to play nice with Trump. And then, first of all, she was brought into the Oval Office and just kind of thrown onto camera without her knowledge in advance and embarrassed. And now today, Trump is basically going to pardon the people who tried to kidnap her. Some thanks for Gretchen Whitmer for being the Democrat who stuck out her neck to try to show that she wants to cooperate with Donald Trump. He's just making her look like a fool. So again, it's not a great situation when you're fighting someone who has the entire U.S. government on his side. I don't want to suggest that it's just an easy path to winning, but submitting to Trump seems to be the worst possible option.
Right, and the examples that move faster, your piece refers to evidence, and we try to do that around here. Some of these things are long-term, and the truth is you don't always know, and that's not always an exciting or satisfying answer, but you don't know. But in the area of trade, where you said it's measurable with China, or tech, where there are business aspects, I think you get more evidence quickly. So you have people in tech who think of themselves, the leadership, as very smart, very powerful with their capital and their equity and their voting share stock. And they say they're disruptors, Jonathan. I don't know if you ever heard about that. You know,
Yeah, I
they
heard the word.
disrupt. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then when it came to the shakedown, they did what exactly every other establishment type does. Zuckerberg was threatened with jail time, was disrespected. Trump got an ally on the board, which is not nothing, got a public apology and type thing. I mean, by which I mean going to the inauguration and everything else. And here's Bloomberg catching up on how it's going 120 days in. Zuckerberg took actions to make Meta more Trump friendly. So basically reshaping one of the most powerful digital and media companies in the world. It hasn't resulted in, quote, much tangible gain. If Zuckerberg's about face has come off as craven to liberals, the MAGA crowd isn't necessarily buying it either. A Trump advisor who specializes in digital says there's tremendous distrust. Jonathan.
Right. One of the long-standing aspects of Donald Trump's psychology is a real inability to conceive of relationships that are partnerships on an equal basis. He thinks all human relationships are a form of domination of one person over another. So once you've submitted to Donald Trump, he just thinks he owns you. He loses all respect for you, and he'll just keep humiliating you over and over again. He did this during his entire first term. All these Republicans who thought they could deal with him and get something out of it, he would, remember he called Kevin McCarthy my Kevin, and Mike Pence just had to just say the most absurd, obsequious flattery on camera of Donald Trump looking like some kind of North Korean regime stooge. Before, in the end, Trump just was standing by as people were trying to hang Mike Pence. There really is no winning with Donald Trump unless you can be lucky enough for him not to know that you exist. That's the best possible outcome. But if you don't get that, you're better off standing up to him.
Yeah.
What I wrote is that he's a classic bully. This is just a figure that we all know throughout our lives. And in an American culture, it's an archetype, right? Someone who craves submission and fears conflict. So
right. And we think of it in juvenile terms sometimes, that the stakes are higher. Of course, you can study plenty of history and political philosophy where it does come back to psychology, individual or group or mob psychology. And that's why autocrats have proven to have a level of support sometimes when people say, well, that's what we need anyway. Let's simplify it. But you liken it in the piece to a classic, at least for viewers of a certain age. We are who we are, Jonathan, and we are of our generation. And some of us grew up on Back to the Future, and your piece cites this bully.
I thought I told you never to come in here. Well, it's gonna cost us. How much money you got on you?
Well, how much you want, Beth?
All right, punk. Now I'm gonna...
Whoa, Beth. What's that?
It's fiction. We don't advocate violence, but as Malcolm X and Marty McFly would say, self-defense, hitting back is intelligence, not necessarily proactive violence. Biff, in that film, was violent, at times appeared to be a sex predator, and it took a person standing up to him. Why do you bring up that very simple comparison in your piece?
Because I think Trump's fan base really cultivated an image in his mind of a different fictional character. I mentioned Michael Corleone, who of course is a mobster, but he's really the protagonist of the Godfather movies, and he's this calculating figure. He's really this fantasy figure in the minds of a lot of men who like the films, right? He's always playing this long, shrewd, strategic game of playing all the chess pieces. So I think when Trump was launching this tariff war, I think his fans were sort of imagining him as this Michael Corleone executing a long-term strategy of domination. And I was just trying to say, no, the fictional counterpart you're looking at is Biff Tannen, someone who just is impulsive and thinks in short-term ways and is just looking for self-gratification.
Really striking. As you know, and a postscript, Jonathan, in the later films, Biff's fortune was built on a kind of time travel fraud.
Makes you think.
It really does. I don't know what it makes you think about, but something. Appreciated your writing here and joining us. Jonathan Chait, thank you from the Atlantic.
Thanks a lot, Ari.
Yes, sir. We're going to finish a break, but then we have absolute uproar as RFK and the health problems, the science problems, the fact problems of his administration land squarely at the Centers for Disease Control. That's coming up.
My opinions about vaccines are irrelevant. I don't think people should be taking advice, medical advice from me.
Pressed under oath at a congressional hearing, RFK said don't take advice from him, which was a cop-out on what he's been doing, but a way of ducking. But now compare that claim to the Washington Post reporting today. Medical experts at the CDC have been blindsided by RFK trying to use his federal powers to do that which he said he shouldn't do, basically, which is reshape or distort things so that he is a medical advisor because he wants to shape who gets the COVID vaccine. RFK is now going to try to ban government scientists from doing something that is a core part of peer-reviewed transparent science, which is simply publishing their research in medical publications. Here's the Washington Post headline. Quite simply, RFK says he may bar scientists from publishing in top medical journals. When people say it's a war on science and a war on facts, this is what they're talking about. What could sound like rhetoric is actually the government versus peer-reviewed science as we know it. We'll be right back. We close with the story about RFK and the war on science. You can tell me what you think at Ari Melber on social media or go to arimelber.com where you can always connect with me directly. That does it for us tonight.